Well, hey, all, welcome to the Military Wire with Mike Schindler. This is the podcast where we interview America's most elite men and women who have served this country. As you guys know, we share their stories of overcoming, their proven lessons in leadership, and their journey to finding mission and purpose. And today's topic is relevant to many. It's how to overcome the demons of war and create a positive today moment. This is the topic I get asked to address often. And here to help us unpack this subject is the author of the book, War Stories, Sometimes the Real Fight Starts After the Battle, Stephen Elliott, who has ties to the death of American hero Pat Tillman. Now, before I properly introduce Stephen Elliott, I want to put a shout out to this segment's sponsors, Honest Talk International and Circle for Parents. Both these organizations have a vetted network of experts that are standing by to help our listeners navigate issues related to nutrition, fitness, parenting, relationships, intimacy. I encourage you guys to visit their sites, honesttalkinternational.com, circleforparents.com. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to frame this for our audience so they get an idea of who you are. You were a member of the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. You were deployed in 2004 to Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Of which that moment in time became a turning point moment in your life. And I will say that I remember the events around that time. Many of us remember the reports of the NFL player Pat Tillman. He left a lucrative career as an NFL player to join the Army. He went on to become a Ranger, was subsequently killed in action. And I think there was a lot of, there was a lot of curiosity around this. How did this happen? And it later turned out that it wasn't by enemy fire, but what was later reported as friendly fire in April of 2004. Stephen, his story and your story is very personal to you. So tell us why that is.
Yeah, so I had finished my bachelor's degree in 2003, and then 3 weeks after that, I was in Army basic training on the path to become a Ranger, largely in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And I found myself ultimately, once I completed all of my selection for that unit, I found myself assigned to the same platoon at Fort Lewis with Pat Tillman and his brother Kevin. And so we all deployed together to the Afghan-Pakistan border in April of 2004. And as you correctly note, Pat was killed in the midst of an enemy ambush by friendly fire. Which we all knew that virtually immediately within 24 hours, that was understood to be fact within our platoon. Lots of things began at that point to a whole new narrative began. But the upshot of it all is that we don't know to this day specifically whose rounds are responsible for Pat's death. We know that people fired on him and his squad mistakenly believing their squad to be part of the enemy element. So it was nothing malicious from the part of our platoon that fired there, but certainly a mistake was made in firing on Pat and others in the squad. And from what we do know, there are likely two individuals within the platoon that are responsible for Pat's death, and I am one of those two men. And so both as someone that I worked with and respected, both he and Kevin, and then certainly within the context of that tragedy, our stories became intertwined.
Man, this is, I can't even imagine. I mean, regardless whether the individual is portrayed as a hero, American hero, et cetera, or not, but being in an environment where your brothers are killed by friendly fire has not got to be easy. And your book, War Story, exposes the guilt that you felt about Tillman's death, even though it wasn't personally assigned to you, but how you then descended into alcoholism and depression. You lost your marriage, even kind of gave up on your faith. It was really kind of a chaotic period in your life. At least that's what you describe in the book. And I would say that's probably not uncommon for many who face trauma in battle. Stephen, you and I have known each other for some time. You're a positive guy now. How did those negative emotions get a grip on you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. There's a lot to that. I mean, I think some of the main main contributors were, frankly, to some extent, you don't. There's no amount of training, and there's certainly you can't watch Black Hawk Down or Saving Private Ryan enough to prepare you for actually going to war. You can't. And I don't mean. I mean, we were prepared. We had, conducted many live fires that were incredibly realistic, and I'd put lots and lots of rounds through my weapon. So I don't mean that. But I mean, being in that instance, not a theoretical instance of losing somebody you would care about, but a real instance of that. You can't possibly know how you'll respond, and then there really is no. You don't spend much time preparing yourself for, or even having a context for much quote unquote messier outcomes. You think about getting wounded, or you think about being killed, which even then, as a young man, you don't have a lot of context for that either. But that, for me, that's about as far as it went. But the idea that I would be responsible, or possibly responsible, or part of the group that was considered responsible for anybody's death, whether it was Pat or anybody else, was just unfathomable. That would have been not something I had a context for. So then you find yourself, maybe in the decision tree, you had 2 or 3 different branches that you might possibly go down, and you hope you don't go down those in terms of, getting hurt or not coming home. But you don't have a context for what happens if I come home, I have all my fingers and toes, but the life as I knew it and who I thought myself to be is effectively gone. And so I didn't have a context for it. I didn't have a container for it. And I think, as far as how those emotions, how those, wounds of the spirit, the guilt, the shame, all of that, sort of compounded was, I was somebody who had at that time, as a 22-year-old young man, just turned 23, I had become very comfortable becoming defined by what I did. Uh, because up to that point, what I did was good and successful. I experienced great success in my undergrad. I graduated near the top of my class in business school. I had myriad of opportunities, not including the military, I could have pursued. And then I set the goal, which is to become an Army Ranger, and I did it. And so the danger of allowing our identity to become that which what we do is, it feels really good when the things you're doing are perceived by yourself and others to be quote unquote good. But what happens when they're not? And when they're not, then that entire edifice, if you are what you've done, if you're one of the guys who shot at Pat Tillman, that's a pretty rough, very dramatic shift in identity. And so I think, in large degree, as far as how that set in was, or was not that it wouldn't have been very painful and difficult anyway, but I think I was a much more ego-driven, fragile person, because I was building my life on my accomplishments. And when that, yeah,
Yeah, that is so powerful, Stephen. I think when you're talking, uh, you know, oftentimes we allow ourselves, to your point, be defined by what we do, what we accomplish, what people perceive us, and that leads to your very point, is we allow then our circumstances to define us at that moment. If they're great, things are great. If they're bad, things are bad. And breaking out of that bond of allowing our circumstances or our accomplishments or even our failures to define us, I think is so. It's a profound statement, and I think you can experience that, or that becomes revealed to us all by going through something traumatic. I think um, it's tragic, and I think it's fair to say that what's interesting to me is that story was painted all over the headlines. Um, I can't even imagine the guilt that you were carrying. Obviously it had an impact on your marriage, your faith, and I want to get to that here in a little bit. But there was one thing that you brought up in the book that some choose. some choose to do this though, knowing that that could be an outcome. And I think it's fair to say that most of today's youth are aware that if they were part of the the military, there's a strong chance they could be in fact deployed. And I think one of the reasons the military is struggling to meet its recruitment goals is because of that very reason. Is, wait a second, this isn't just going to be free college. There could be very real circumstances that I'll have to live with. So you lived it. Why do you think some choose to fight for a country or a cause knowing that the end result could be death or even the struggles that you faced?
I think I think as humans, I think most of us are, whether that takes us to the military or not, I think most of us feel viscerally that things in this world are not as they should be, and they want to be part of making them right. And, we can do a lot of, things that maybe are counter to that, unwittingly, in our attempts to help in the world. But I think a lot of people, particularly young people, and sometimes we wrongly make fun of them for it. The idea that they're fired up about like fixing wrongs in the world. We should be encouraging that. Like we should be we should be motivated by my 17-year-old daughter who is frustrated with things maybe that I've just gotten used to and learned to live with. And so I think some of it is good old fashioned idealism that the adults could learn something from. And so I think that's part of it. As far as how that relates to military service, I think in my experience, there's tons of reasons for that. I mean, I served with guys that it was a very homogenous group of reasons that led people to be in the same unit. So lots of people come from lots of different backgrounds. I know for me, and I think if you look at any major decision that a lot of people make in their lives, or a turning point decision, going to a college or going to the military or what have you, you'll oftentimes find a very important personal relationship at the heart of that. I don't think I would have. I had a very close relationship with my mom's dad, my grandfather, who served a year and a half in Italy in World War II. And I think I always viewed the lens of manhood through his military service. And so when 9/11 happens, it was almost like, well, he volunteered after Pearl Harbor. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the abstract headline of we're at war and you should consider what service means. It was a very personal relationship that contextualized that possibility of service. So I think that's not always the case. You talk to people who certainly they've joined and didn't have any family in the military, but there's a lot of people who have, and that is almost sometimes a spoken or sometimes unspoken familiar rite of passage. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, I think we want. Most of us want to help make the world better and fix wrongs that are right. And in theory anyway, the military can be a place that appeals to folks who have that desire.
Yeah, that it's so interesting. And you and I still operate within this realm. Having brothers and sisters that are still serving, and certainly those that have gotten out and staying close to them. Is this whole sense of mission and purpose. And, when we get into the military, we're assigned that mission and purpose. And then when we get out, it's figuring out what, again, is that mission and purpose, right? How do we continue to add value? To your point, is we want to right wrongs. The military seems to be a good place for some, and others are solving other problems. But then getting back out and being sure that we're still an asset, that we can be part of the solution, I think is so important. And you speak to that. It's the topic, how to overcome the demons of war and create a positive today moment, I think is so important for many. They wake up and they're wondering, what is my mission? What is clarity of purpose? How do I move on? How do I not allow my circumstances to define me? And in your book, which is excellent, by the way,
Thank you.
Yeah, you describe your journey to recovery, finding a way to forgive and a way to find hope. How did you break those negative bonds, Stephen? Because I think that's so important. I think people get trapped by those bonds. They begin to define themselves, as you made mention before. How did you break out of that? How did you recover your marriage? How did you forgive? How did you get back on a pathway to success. And we'll talk a little bit about that success, but how did you break the bonds?
Yeah, I guess first and foremost for me, I had to be broken. I had to get to a place to where um, I got to. I mean, it's cliche, and I probably some listen to this roll their eyes. I probably would have rolled my eyes at this, 8 or 9 years ago too. But the reason why people say it all the time is because it's true. Is that you have to get to the end of yourself. You have to get to the end
Yeah.
of your ego, your pride, your self-reliance that is oftentimes completely ignorant of all the help people have given you along the way. I do not believe in a self-made person. I believe that there are really motivated, hardworking people who can thrive, and they're only going to thrive within the context of healthy community. And that's true for all of us. And so, for me, I had to get to the end of myself. Things had to get bad enough in my life, for me to get help, and I had to stop hiding behind accomplishments. I got out of the military and landed a great job with a major wealth management firm, and things were just ticking along as I tried to put more and more accomplishments between myself and April of 2004. But that didn't work because the wounds that were incurred internally on that day were just continuing to metastasize and do more damage. And so for me, my marriage had to get bad enough and life had to get bad enough before I started raising my hand and say, maybe I'm not equipped on my own to deal with what it is that I'm dealing with. And so I had to invite other people into that. And I had to get to a place, with the Lord. I'm a Jesus follower, and I walked away from that because I viewed him as the problem. Ultimately, I had viewed God up to that point really as an insurance policy, that he's there to sort of, cut off the sharp edges of my life and make sure that I can accomplish what I want to. And that orientation had to be drastically altered, which was a long and painful process. And the length and the pain was directly proportionate to my pride. And I don't think it had to be long. I don't think it had to be painful, but it was, because that's how long I chose to wallow in my own pride and my own ego. And once I was finally willing to bend the knee and to admit that I can't fix myself and I need help, then things got harder in a different way, in the same way that
Sure.
when you first take the bandage off a wound that you've been covering for years, it's going to be pretty ugly. But that's the first thing that you have to do in order to treat it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's in the Reader's Digest version is I had to be humbled, and I had to invite other people in. I had to ask forgiveness in order to forgive, and realize that I'm the problem of humanity, the problem that is this world. I'm a part of it.
Yeah.
I'm a part of that problem. I'm not separate and distinct from the others, quote unquote, that are ruining things and that have hurt me. And if they would just get their act together and apologize, then things would be fine. No, we're all a part of it in our own ways. And so it was a humbling process for me over about 12 years. And I wish it wouldn't have taken 12 years, but that's what it took for me.
Wow. I mean, gosh, as you're talking, I loved what you said, that, being broken. I don't love the fact that everybody's broken, right? I mean, I think we can admit that we don't like the fact that any of us are broken, but the fact that we have to admit that we're broken. And then in some ways, it's just applying the basic military experience that we've had is understanding what our support network is and being willing to exercise it when we need it. When we're in the field and we need help, we request help.
That's right.
But yet when we transition out and suddenly we're like, man, I am carrying so much weight. It's heavy. I don't know what to do with it. I don't want to admit that I have issues or that I need help. That's where the suffocation and the grip begins to hold tight. And that's why, our brothers and sisters fall to suicide and other alcoholism and you name it, all the other vices. And I just want to say thank you for that, for allowing or giving some of the listeners permission to seek help. I mean, it's number one is understanding clarity of purpose. What is your action plan for your life? And number two is understanding what your support network is and how do you achieve what it is you want to do and be and go. and who's at the center of that. And I think for you, you named it Jesus. For some, it'll be something else. But I would relate to you in that regard is having him as the core. You can beat a lot of demons that way, no question. Yeah, no question. It's cool. Your story, it's a compelling story. It's a tragic story, but it's a story that has an overcoming. And that's what I love about it. Today, you're president of Capstone Trust. Just an amazing turnaround story. You worked through the trials, the depression, you recovered your marriage. I mean, you continue to kick tails on the demons. Stephen, how can others do this? How can others find their path? I know you said you got to admit that you're broken, but that's step one. But how do you move onto that path to hope and success?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's road and everyone's journey is certainly unique to their own. But I think, step one is admitting there's a problem. Step two is understanding that it's not a mark of failure or a mark of weakness to invite others into the solution. We were all made in and for community. And how that looks for each of us is very different. We're all different people. There's no cookie cutter community for each of us, but we're not made to do life alone, and it's not weakness to invite other people into it. Whether that person is your buddy you deployed with, or your spouse, or a pastor or a clinician or whatever, is start having those conversations and start recognizing that that maybe what has brought you to this point is you and your choices, with the best of intentions to try and soldier on and carry the load by yourself. You're not supposed to. That's not how it is. And so yeah, I would just encourage people to invite others into that conversation, which for some of you listening, that may be the absolute scariest proposition in the world. I mean, there were times years ago where if you would have said, why don't you go talk honestly about the fact that you may have been one of the people to kill Pat Tillman? I would have said, why don't you just throw me out of an airplane without a parachute? Because that sounds preferable. At least it'll be over quickly. Because the idea of sitting in front of anybody for 5 minutes, let alone 45, to talk about whatever's going on, just scared the crud out of me. And so I think a lot of times we're making decisions, or we're avoiding decisions out of fear, and we wrap that in self-reliance. We wrap that in toughness. Really, we're afraid. And so that's hard, and I don't know exactly what that takes to kind of break through for certain folks, but just invite other people into it, and understand that the lie that we can often be told, that you're alone and nobody else has gone through or could understand what you're going through, is precisely that. It's a lie. The lie that you are what you did or left undone. You are the guy who never left the fob and you're having a hard time. What right do you have? That's garbage. There's not enough deployments. There aren't enough badges. There aren't enough years of service to make you the person and give you the identity that you want. And the beauty of it is that the military service and the lessons that we all learned while in uniform can have even greater and more powerful impact in our civilian lives. That I would tell people that your greatest mission you've yet to go on. And the glory days are not the days when you were doing whatever you were doing for the military. That's great, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we need you now. We need you in your home, in your business, in your community. And that's why I love the message that you have, Mike, is that it's recognizing that as good or even as bad as maybe what our pasts have been in the military, those are all opportunities to learn and grow, and continue moving together as civilians in society. And so I think that I would just want to encourage people in that your best days are ahead of you if you can find ways to let go of the past.
Yeah, it's so true, right? I mean, it's that principle of learn from the past, right? Focus on the present and plan for the future. And the best way to do that is, to your point, inviting people into your community. And I think that's the true sense of manhood, is owning your stuff, right? Own your stuff, whether it's your success, your failures, etc. Own it. And the areas that you need help, invite others in to help you.
That's right.
And that's a badge of honor, not a badge of shame. And I would agree with you there. Stephen, what advice do you have for those who are transitioning that are getting ready to just embark on their next mission in civilian life? They're hanging up the uniform. They're going to go out and hopefully make impact. What advice do you have for those that are getting ready to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and I would say it's okay if it's hard. It's difficult to plan and know all of the variables you're going to face, outside of the military, and certainly whatever your military experience was could, dramatically alter that. If you did 3 years and you got out, that's one thing. If you did 30 years, then that's a whole different thing. But I think I would say it's a new adventure, and don't expect it to be smooth, but certainly invite people into the process, become a student, learn. Even if you were the best sergeant major in the Army, and you've got all manner of experience, become a student, because the culture is different, life is different, but at the same time, so much of what I think people have experienced in the military, even a lot of the crud, can become super useful. So yeah, I would just encourage people to recognize that it can be challenging, and to not diminish that possibility, and as such, make sure you've got good community around you, and good people that can speak into your life, that you can talk to, and resources that you can get help with, to sort of navigate those challenges to the extent that you experience them.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. It's Stephen, this is such a good interview. I know you and I could probably talk for hours, and I know our listeners have short attention spans. So I want to wrap this up and be sure that people understand how to find your book, War Story. I just want to put it out there again and say the War Story is a phenomenal read, and I encourage everybody to get it. But how do people find your book, and how do they get in touch with you?
Yep. They can find the book on Amazon. It's available for pre-sale now, and it'll be out in bookstores, and officially released on May 21st, so a week from tomorrow. And then as far as finding me, they can find me through elliottfund.org. ELLIOTT fund.org. That's the organization that we're using to channel any book proceeds that I would otherwise receive are going to be given to the Elliott Fund, and then we're going to turn around and give them away to other organizations doing good work in the military mental health space. So if they want to know more of what we're up to there, they can go to elliottfund.org. Certainly you can order the book from that site. You can also, we have a petition that we've prepared, that we're going to be sending to the Secretary of Defense and the chairmen of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee, recommending 17 specific changes to active duty military mental health. A lot of focus gets paid to the VA and how they deal with mental health, which is certainly understandable. But the one thing that all veterans have in common is that they were once on active duty. And so we think that there's a lot of gaps at the point of trauma on the active duty side that we could be addressing, and we hope to have that conversation at a larger level. So feel free to go there, elliottfund.org, read the petition. If you think it's a good idea, feel free to add your name to it, and we'll go from there.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, listeners, I just want to say, how to overcome the demons of war and create a positive today moment. Hopefully you gain some knowledge from this interview with Stephen, and his experience, quite a burden, but understanding that you don't have to be defined by your past, that you need to really invite community into your situation so that you can press on, move forward, and become really part of America's greatest asset. Continue to add value beyond military service. Don't allow those days to be your best days or even your worst days. Go on and continue to fail forward. Go on and continue to make impact. Stephen Elliott, your book, War Story, I encourage everybody to read it. It is a great read. I'm glad you're back on the pathway to success and recovery and adding value to people. You do such great work, and I appreciate you being on the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Mike. A lot of fun.